Tisztelt Hölgyeim és Uraim!
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome you in the name of the Center for Fundamental Rights at the next station of We Win, They Lose, which is a project 2025 by the Heritage Foundation. My name is Veronika Antal-Horváth, and I am the hostess of tonight. Our event series of We Win, They Lose was launched in February 2024, specifically to create a dialogue between the political sphere and experts in politics, and also to explain the rules of the American elections and the processes of the election. I would like to ask Törcsi, the operative director of the Center for Fundamental Rights, to give his introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, dear Mr. Representative, Mr. Director, I would like to thank that you've accepted our invitation. And if we think about this conference series of We Win, They Lose, this is our third event in this series. But if we think of not just this series, but the regular meetings of Hungarian and American conservatives, I can say that there is no week in Budapest or Washington without leaders of think tanks, the economics, journalists, media personalities wouldn't meet in person. I think that's a proof of one phenomenon, that despite the fact that the relationship between the two governments is not the most cheerful, but I think this has been the best era of friendship between Hungarian and American conservatives since the fall of the Berlin Wall, and I think this is also one of the first times that the cooperation between these two nations is so effective, and we can concentrate on what is important in our common interest. And we chose the title We Win, They Lose, that we borrowed from Ronald Reagan, who used this phrase to describe the strategy that he wants to apply in order to defeat the Soviet Union, which he did accomplish, and we're very grateful to him, to President Reagan, and also of the American conservatives, that they contributed to the fact that we Hungarians were able to enjoy freedom after 1989. But in 2024, when Hungarian conservatives have been in government for 14 years, I think we can give a recipe ourselves to our Western friends. With Spencer Chrétien, my colleagues will have a discussion about the new recipes about conservatism in our countries, and what we can tell our conservative friends, that what Viktor Orbán said in 2002 when he lost the election back then, that we were in government but not in power, and that's the conclusion that we've been building on for the past 14 years, that we conservatives, Hungarian conservatives, do not only want to be in government but also in power. And I think that we were successful in draining the swamp, at least here, and our objective for the 9th of June is to drain the swamp of Brussels as well. And I think that can also be a good objective for the Republicans for next November, when they can hopefully gain back the Senate and Congress as well. And we also wish that Donald Trump should be the next president of the United States. That would also help not just the Americans but also the entire world, because we see that there are so many conflicts in Europe and also in the Pacific region as well. And in the past 30 years, since we've seen democracy and freedom in this corner of the world. We've never been closer to a global war where we currently are. There are many reasons for this. There is for once that the terrorist organization Hamas has attacked Israel, and Russia has invaded Ukraine, and that the progressive leaders of the Western world have never been so weak as today. They cannot find the answers to the conflicts, and they do not show force to the challengers of the Western world, and they cannot cannot be respectful or respected by our adversaries. And in order to prevail and to we have to show force, we have to show strength, and that's why we need a strong leader like Donald Trump, under the leadership of whom we haven't had conflicts, haven't had wars, and that's why we hope that the Americans will choose a president who can not only win peace, but also will be able to achieve what we've achieved here in us Hungarian conservatives, to be not only in government but in power, because without draining the swamp you can't really achieve meaningful change in government either. Thank you very much, and I wish you a fruitful discussion. Thank you very much, Mr. Director, and I would like to ask Ernő Saler-Baros, the European MEP of Fidesz, to share his thoughts. Ladies and gentlemen, dear American friends, we win, they lose. Ronald Reagan has said this as a candidate in the middle of the Cold War. He said this phrase when two reigning powers, the Soviet Union and the United States, were in a very cool foreign political relationship. That was the final hours of the Soviet Union. In 1981, he was inaugurated after his second term. In 1989, the Berlin Wall has fallen, and then we have also eliminated the Iron Curtain. The President Reagan did not help in that, but he did contribute to this era. And after the 1990, there was a new era, new period in Europe. Europe was united again, and we were convinced that this will bring an era of peace. When leader of a state is elected, it usually is about internal affairs. However, electing the president of the United States, since it's a world power, it can bring about important changes on a geopolitical level all around the world, and also on global economic processes. And what is the most important, perhaps more important than anything else in the world in 2024, that this change can bring about peace. We live in the era of dangers. We see challenges after challenges that are really trying our resilience and persistence. It started in 2020 with the COVID pandemic. After defending the health of our people, we had to remedy the economical damages that entailed from the pandemic. After we managed that on our eastern border, there was a war that erupted, which resulted in very harmful sanctions initiated by Brussels that also further weakened our economy. Then the gender lobby and woke ideologies have further weakened the context, and that's why we are impatiently waiting who will be the next president of the United States. Whether it will lead to the escalation of the current conflicts, or whether it will be a new re-emergence of constructive dialogue. Who will be the winner? Who will be victorious? Hungarian economic and social and political cooperations between Hungary and America are very good, are friendly, thanks to the great community of Hungarian origins who were accepted by the USA after the they fled communist repression. We thank them for their hosting us and accepting us. We do fight the LGBTQ lobby, the gender ideology, the repression of the individual, while we try to fight for our faith, our culture, our freedom, our families, and our borders. Conservative values have stood the test of time, the challenge. And the people have to use their freedom to do good and to help the development and evolution of others, to live their freedom and happiness, and seek their happiness also with the consideration of others and of the pursuit of happiness of others. We have to establish good relationships with our foreign allies, and we also need changes sometimes. Governments have to find the common grounds in their cooperations and in their dialogues, because that's what brings us forward and bears the fruit of our common prosperity. That's why we need dedicated experts and political organizations and associations that look into the future and also seek constructive cooperations together. That's why we have to make these gestures and take these steps towards each other that create cooperation and common work in the framework of cooperation. That's why we are very happy to have the representatives of the Heritage Foundation here, because they dare to dream big and they also dare to take the steps in order to implement these dreams or realize these dreams. It's important to reestablish the good relationship between Hungary and the US so that we can have a fruitful cooperation in the future as well. On the 9th of June, we want to drain the swamp in Brussels as well. That's what Donald Trump and his administration wishes to do in Washington in November. We win, they lose. In June and in November, I ask you to vote for peace. Thank you for your attention, and Mr. Director, thank you for giving us the opportunity to think together about the future of the US and Hungary. Thank you very much. And now we will have a panel discussion. I would like to ask our American friend, Spencer Chrétien, the project coordinator of the Project 2025, and also my colleague Zoltán Kocskovics, the geopolitical analyst of the Center for Fundamental Rights.
Hello, it's great to see you again. As we were reliably informed, this is the fourth We Win, They Lose. I seem to have already lost count, but there will be many more before November. So welcome back to our series preceding the American presidential elections. And it's a great pleasure and honor to welcome Spencer Chrétien from the world-famous Heritage Foundation. Of course, you know Heritage. You've seen many of the representatives of Heritage speak at our events and at other conservative events in Hungary. But let me ask you, Spencer, how did you find your way to Heritage?
Sure. Well, thank you very much for having me. It has been a wonderful few days in Budapest. I've really enjoyed seeing the country of Hungary, and I feel honored at the invitation to be here. I worked in the first Trump administration, and the Heritage Foundation has always been a very important part of the American conservative movement, not only in our capital of Washington, D.C., but actually people throughout the country look to the work that Heritage does. And in 2022, the Heritage Foundation started Project 2025. Heritage has always served as a resource for conservative presidents, including President Trump, President Reagan, other presidents over the last 50 years. But this time around, the Heritage Foundation wanted to get a head start early. So we started this project almost 3 years before the election. And Project 2025 is about helping to lay the groundwork for hopefully a successful conservative administration beginning in 2025. So that is how I ended up at the Heritage Foundation. I should emphasize also that one of the key things about this project was when we started it, there was not a single major candidate who had declared his or her campaign for the presidency. We have shared our work with all of the candidates during the Republican primary. Our ideas are open to anybody, and we have hundreds of people who worked for President Trump the first time who are involved in this project, Project 2025, but we don't speak for him or his campaign. Ultimately, of course, the policy is up to them which way they decide to go. So that's a little bit about Project 2025 and its background, and I was the second person hired on our team. We now have a team of about 7 people, but we work with many different departments within the Heritage Foundation and within more than 100 conservative partner organizations that comprise our Project 2025 Board of Advisors.
So great, Spencer. Let's explore this topic a little bit deeper. Heritage is quite famous for a mandate for leadership, which is basically a huge book. But it's also a set of policy proposals. And you've compiled these mandates several times over for different administrations, once for an incoming Congress, I believe. How does this work go, and how much do you rely upon the experience of doing these mandates to create Project 2025?
Well, Mandate for Leadership first came out in 1980, and it was handed to President-elect Reagan. In 1980, in the United States, we were wrapping up the one-term administration of an unpopular Democratic president. We had an energy crisis, we had an immigration crisis, there was economic decline in our country, and a lot of those circumstances we see today.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but Jimmy Carter could find his way off of a podium, though.
He could. He was a spring chicken by presidential standards. But we, that year in 1980, the Heritage Foundation convened more than 400 people from throughout the conservative movement, and they wrote this book, and it went chapter by chapter, agency by agency. So there was a chapter on the Department of Defense, there was a chapter on the Department of State, there was a chapter on the Department of Health and Human Services, and then it was served up to President Reagan. And the Heritage legend, which is true, is that at the first meeting of President Reagan's cabinet, everybody had a copy on his or her chair, and President-elect Reagan said, well, this is the plan for what we're going to do across the federal government. So that was the first edition of Mandate for Leadership. Over time, the Heritage Foundation continued to produce this publication, and it kind of got smaller over the years, and it also became more of a heritage-only product. But this time around, we went back to the future. We did it like we did in 1980, and so it's available for free online at project2025.org. It is almost 900 pages. We had more than 400 people contribute to it, and once again, you'll see we go chapter by chapter, agency by agency, through the federal government, outlining what a conservative president needs to be thinking about at each federal agency. So, for example, our chapter on the United States Agency for International Development talks about how that agency is supposed to provide food, water, and shelter to the world's neediest people. It's not supposed to enforce an LGBT agenda in poor countries. We talk about, in our chapter on the Department of Health and Human Services, we talk about the unprecedented power that the governments gave themselves in 2020 during the COVID pandemic, and how in the future that agency needs to be a protector of not only healthcare, but also the personal liberty that we enjoy as Americans. So that's Mandate for Leadership, and again, it's available at project2025.org. And where the other big difference is this time around, we released it a year ago. So it's the first time the Mandate for Leadership has come out in an odd-numbered year. It came out in April 2023, and rather than just handing it to the president-elect, we shared it with all the candidates in the primary season, and it is, it's going to be a year and a half old by the time we get to the election, and so. We're proud of the work that went into it, and hopefully the next president, President Trump, will turn to our suggestions in this book.
Just to illustrate how huge the first mandate in 1980 was, I recall it was 6,000 pages long.
I thought it was about 1,100, but.
Well over 1,000 pages long.
This one's 900.
And President Reagan expected his cabinet to read it. Those were truly different times.
Yeah, well, I was at an event recently, and somebody who works for a U.S. senator said his boss was a third of the way through the book. So we have some readership.
Right. The last time before this you created a mandate for leadership, was that for Donald Trump, if I remember correctly, in 2016. How much of that set of policy proposals did he adopt? How much did he use? How useful did he find his first mandate?
Well, in 2016, the Heritage Foundation did release Mandate for Leadership that year, and President Trump adopted about 2/3 of the proposals in Mandate for Leadership. That was a similar number to President Reagan. So we've seen the two most successful conservative administrations in recent memory have taken between 60% and 2/3 of the recommendations in Mandate for Leadership. There are areas of the book you'll read where there is some disagreement. We're not trying to hand down the Ten Commandments. We're trying to provide a menu of options for the next conservative president by identifying those areas where our movement is united, but also highlighting those few areas where we have multiple opinions so that the president and his team really can choose the direction that they want to go.
Great. So that's Mandate for Leadership, and then there is Project 2025. Of course, Project 2025 is intimately connected to Mandate for Leadership. It grew out of that, but they are not the same things, right? Can you identify the key differences between the two, please?
Yeah, well, Mandate for Leadership represents the first pillar of Project 2025. We have 4 pillars total. And the vision of this project, when we laid it out in 2022, was that there would be these 4 pillars. So the first pillar is the book that I just described. It outlines a conservative vision across each cabinet department in America. The second pillar is our presidential personnel database. The U.S. president, in general, traditionally appoints between 3,000 and 4,000 people who work in the federal government, and their job is supposed to be to get that president's agenda through the bureaucracy, through what we call the deep state. So that's the second pillar of the project, is trying to identify these people. Of course, we're not the hiring authority, but we hope to be in a position where we can make recommendations to the next conservative president of people who want to move to Washington, want to work for the president, and want to help fight the bureaucracy and actually advance a conservative agenda in D.C. In the Trump administration, my final role was I worked in the Presidential Personnel Office, which does the political hiring across the government for these 3,000 to 4,000 people. So that's pillar 2. Then the third pillar is we have our Presidential Administration Academy, which is currently 26 online, on-demand video lectures about what it's like to serve at the pleasure of the president, what it's like to come to Washington, D.C., everything from how to work with the media, how to use social media effectively, how to understand the federal budget process in the United States, how to write a rule or a regulation and get it through an agency, because conservatives find when we come to Washington, D.C., it's 95% Democrat. And there's no owner's manual on our desk. We have to kind of figure it out. So with what we're doing with this third pillar, this academy, is we're combining the experiences, we're combining the knowledge of more than 100 conservative organizations, and dozens of instructors have served before in the Trump administration and other conservative administrations. And we're sharing our knowledge, giving lessons ahead of time so that people will be prepared. And then the fourth pillar of the project is what we call our 180-day playbook, and that involves taking the big ideas that we outline in the 900-page book and really expanding upon them so that we have a proposed draft transition plan for each federal agency, starting day one and going out to the first 6 months of the new 4-year term, because that is when the new president has the most political advantage. That's when he'll have the most political capital. So we need some victories in the first 6 months. Those are the 4 pillars of the project, and it's growing every day. It's a work in progress, and we look forward to hopefully not only preparing for the president, hopefully President Trump, who will take office next year, but also bringing about a permanent change on the political right so that the conservative movement in America is prepared to serve in Washington, to be trained up ahead of time, and to always be thinking about the art of government and the art of presidential transitions so that we not only are in government, but we also are in power, because that's what the left does, and we need to lay this groundwork in the long term to catch up to them.
Yes, that's actually a quote from Prime Minister Viktor Orban. When he had his first term, 4-year term as a prime minister, he eventually ended up losing his first re-election campaign, and that's what he said afterwards. That they let us be in government, but they did not allow us to come to power. And many of us here in Hungary feel that that is exactly what happened to Donald Trump during his first term. He had wonderful policy ideas, he had a strategy, he had dynamism, he had a vision for the future of America to make it great again. It would have helped the entire Western civilization, but then he ran into the brick wall of entrenched bureaucracy. Is this what you mean when you speak about the personnel preparations for the transition, that you will actually have to replace a lot of bureaucrats in Washington?
Well, I think there are several distinct issues that you've raised, and again, ultimately, it is up to President Trump, and he will decide on his transition and on his policy priorities. I think in the first Trump administration, many of our greatest accomplishments happened only in the last year or maybe the last 2 years after the people who worked for President Trump had time to figure things out. And it's one of those things where if you're off by just 1 degree at the beginning, you end up in a very different place from where you had intended to be. So that's why it's important to be ready day one. I think President Trump, made our country great again. He made this world so much safer. And in the second term, he will be able to take all of the lessons learned in the first term. Now, as I mentioned before, Washington, D.C. is 95 to 97% Democrat. If you look at political donations in America that are made by employees of the State Department or the U.S. Agency for International Development, it's about 95 to 97% of their money is going to Democratic candidates and to left-wing causes. So those are some pretty staggering numbers. Our vision in this project is that President Trump or a future conservative president is entitled to a federal workforce, to a bureaucracy that is as deferential to him as it currently is to President Biden, or it was to President Obama. And we have not only a problem of bureaucratic resistance to a conservative president, especially to a conservative outsider like President Trump. And by that I mean they obstruct and resist any conservative attempt at change in Washington. But we also have, 75% of federal building space in Washington, D.C. is currently vacant. They're still working from home. They're still on COVID time. 99.5% of our federal employees are rated fully successful or better by their managers. There's no way in a bureaucracy that large that it's really that high. So I think a conservative president will want to reform the civil service as well.
It's a bit like when the FBI investigates whether the FBI was justified in using a firearm, right? So 99.9% of the time they are. Incredible. How can you, it's a very important question to us, by the way, as well in Europe, because we face the same problem with the European bureaucracy.
Yes.
These are people who stand where they sit. Their primary interest is to maintain their position in their cushy seats and running the European Union, or in your case, the federal government. What are your plans to either dislodge them or convince them to actually do some work to earn their wages?
Well, I think I recommend that everybody read the 3rd chapter of Mandate for Leadership, which is our chapter that talks about how a conservative president should manage the federal workforce. But we have multiple tools in our toolbox. There are things that you can do. Many of you, if you're old enough, you might remember when President Reagan fired the striking air traffic controllers. That was the first time that we actually had a reduction in the size of the federal government. We believe in small government at Project 2025. So there are multiple things you can do. You can, when people retire, you cannot replace some of them. You can reassign people to different roles, maybe move them outside DC. And so we, in chapter 3 of our book, we call on the next president to do various things like that, to clear the backlog of people who are challenging their dismissal and can never even get it heard. So there are multiple strategies that can be used to reduce the size and scope of the federal government. And we ultimately want to make for the American people, we want to make Washington less important in their lives and bring more local control, state control to various areas.
Wouldn't we just love it if Brussels was less important in our lives?
Yeah, exactly.
This is a highly acrimonious political campaign. I don't think I've seen anything like this in my lifetime, although American presidential elections are often quite combative, but this is beyond the pale. Do you expect a very difficult transition? Do you expect sabotage from the outgoing Biden administration? And let's hope that it's going to be an outgoing one.
I think there will always be tensions with presidential transitions. American elections are highly contested, and they're always close, and the stakes are enormous when we elect a president. And you go back to the 2000 transition when the people in Bill Clinton's White House removed the W's from the keyboards, which was George W. Bush's middle initial. He was known as W. So I think President Biden will not go down easily. He was elected to the Senate at age 29. He's been in politics for 53 years now, 54 years.
Seems like 155. But
yeah, and there will be, the Presidential Transition Act governs this process, and there has to be certain actions taken by the outgoing administration, as we did in the Trump administration 4 years ago. But yeah, I think it will be a contentious time, and hopefully also a time of great opportunity.
Okay. Let's move on to the election topics. This is a very interesting, highly interesting election season. It has almost turned into a sort of a legal primary fight for President Trump, where he doesn't actually have to defeat political opponents in a political primaries, because he basically he didn't run unopposed, but there was no meaningful resistance to him being nominated once again from the GOP. But there are these legal hurdles that the system keeps putting in his way. And right now there is a trial going on New York. And I must tell you that looking at it from here, from Hungary, from Central Europe, a country that suffered 40 years under socialists, that looks like a show trial to us. What are your impressions on this, looking from the United States?
Well, it is a show trial. It's a total witch hunt. President Trump has faced obstacles that no other president or no other candidate has faced before. If he were losing in the polls or if he weren't running, you wouldn't be hearing about this kind of trial. Even Democrats and progressives have said that there's no way you prosecute somebody for the things he's being prosecuted for. And the other issue is it's blatant interference in our election. Everybody talks about threats to democracy, but the threat to democracy occurs when the current incumbent's administration indicts their political opponent, coordinates 4 different indictments of their political opponent, and so it's never been seen before, this type of election interference, this type of meddling and tilting the scales. I think that President Trump will overcome it. But we are in uncharted waters here as Americans. We saw in 2016, they tried the Russia collusion hoax. In 2020, they tried the mail-in voting, the COVID lockdowns. And this time around, it's obvious that they're literally threatening his freedom with these sham indictments. So, so far, nothing that they've attacked President Trump with has stuck, and I'm hopeful that that will continue to be the case.
Yeah, let's add here that many of the prosecutors who do bring these cases, Alvin Bragg in New York, for example, in that many hundreds of millions of dollars worth civil case, or in Georgia, these prosecutors are known associates of George Soros. They receive donations from the Soros Network for elections. And then we see, at least in this case, the judge has intimate ties to the Democratic Party through his daughter, his adult daughter. These are very dangerous things, I believe. What do you think?
Absolutely, it is very dangerous. We have what we call in America Soros DAs, which basically DA stands for district attorney. So there's a district attorney in Philadelphia, there's a district attorney in New York, there's a district attorney in Fulton County, Georgia. And starting in 2018 and 2020, organizations tied to George Soros contributed huge amounts of money. They defeated in Democratic primaries some of the more moderate Democrats who were local district attorneys, and replaced them with left-wing activists, including the ones in Atlanta and New York. And they don't prosecute criminals. They don't prosecute shoplifters or people who break windows. They're very lax on crime, but the one thing they're very aggressive to prosecute is anything by President Trump or by the people who support him. And that's what we're seeing in these jurisdictions right now.
And it seems to me that, and correct me if this is wrong, but in a sense, the stability of the Republic, the American Republic, now has been put as a weight on the shoulder of these 12 jury members. And let's be realists, we are conservatives. New York City is a very liberal city. What are the chances, how optimistic are you that they are going to reach the correct verdict, which is acquittal? This is a completely folks trial. Even prominent Democrats or liberal commentators like Fareed Zakaria has said that nobody else would be charged with these crimes. But it's still New York City. The weight is immense on these 12 people, and we know that New York is overwhelmingly liberal.
Yeah, if his last name were Jones, he wouldn't be charged with these crimes. I don't want to predict what a jury is going to do. We will see this week the instructions that are given to the jury by the judge. I think that will play a role. Hopefully they'll do the right thing and find him not guilty. But I think there's a possibility that the jury will be hung, which would be a victory for President Trump. We'll see. I think if he's convicted, he has a very, very strong case for appeal. But hopefully it won't come to that. And I think that, people can see through, the American voters can see through that this is all a scam. It's all an effort to stop President Trump by any means necessary. And I don't think they'll fall for it, whatever happens.
Just a note, a hung jury means that the jury comes back without reaching a verdict. Either the guilty or the not guilty verdict needs to be unanimous. If there's even one juror that the other 11 cannot convince, then eventually they will declare a hung jury, and there would have to be a retrial, or there would have to be a decision on whether or not to have a retrial.
That's right. If you have a hung jury, you need to be unanimous in America, and if there's a hung jury, if the jury can't come to a unanimous conclusion, then the case has to be retried. That usually it does not happen for several months. I don't think it would happen before November in this case. And you know, the prosecution has to make a decision as to whether they even want to retry it, which I'm sure they would for President Trump, but sometimes they opt not to do that.
And just to make clear that Donald Trump would not be going to jail before November, that's almost certain. So he would, even in the worst case scenario, he would lodge an appeal, and the process would drag out way beyond November.
That's right, and it's very unusual for someone who's convicted of this type of crime to be given any prison time. They're basically misdemeanors, and they're testing a new legal theory about why they're felonies, the things he's been charged with in New York. But I don't think he will be in jail.
Yes, but the truth is, I don't think any one of us expected this to even get to a criminal trial. This is basically, they are accusing the president of politically motivated creative accounting or something like that. This could be a misdemeanor, this could be a crime, but in this particular circumstances, it should not have come to a trial, and the judge should have stopped the case, shouldn't he?
The judge should have stopped the case. You know, President Trump's team has made good arguments on that point. He's basically been indicted for paying a lawyer and marking that as a legal expense. So that's the nature of the allegations that he faces.
What about any of the other trials? Is there any likelihood that the Biden regime, let's call what it is, can put the former President Donald Trump in jail before November?
I don't think it will happen. My personal opinion is that the New York case will be the only one that occurs before November.
Staying with the election topic, now it's pretty obvious that Donald Trump is the GOP's nominee for the November election. It seems obvious that Joe Biden is the Democrats' nominee for the November election, but we keep asking this question at the we win, they lose discussions, and I'm sorry to say it remains relevant. Is Joe Biden really running for president?
This answer will probably disappoint most people, but I think yes. I think that it's too late to switch out a candidate. It's not a baseball game where you can bring in somebody new at the last minute. And, you know, as I said before, President Biden has been in office, been elected since 1970. He was elected to the Senate at age 29. He's run for president 3 times. The first time he dropped out after it was found that he plagiarized his speech. The second time he got 1%, and President Obama rescued him from the gutter by making him vice president. Then in 2016, he kind of flirted with running, but ultimately didn't. So this was basically his 4th try for the presidency. He is not going to voluntarily relinquish that, and I don't think that there's a legitimately high chance that he will be replaced as the nominee. You can bet on the predicting markets if you want to put your money where your mouth is, but I think they're stuck with Biden.
Yes, as these roundtable discussions moved along, more and more people started to say that yes, he is definitely running. I have to tell you, I completely agree with you that he doesn't want to step down for several reasons. One of them, I think, is a personal reason. How sure could he be that his son Hunter Biden isn't going to end up in jail after basically the Democrats opened Pandora's box with politically motivated persecutions?
Yeah, I think he. You know, he's past his prime, obviously, but he had no real opponents in the Democratic primary. It's not fair to the millions of Democrats who did vote for him to pull him at the last minute. Just like it wouldn't have been fair in 2016 to President Trump to dump him at the convention for someone else. And, there's a difference between the fact that if President Biden had announced a year ago that he was not going to run again, his party would be in a better situation. But that doesn't mean that his party would benefit by him dropping out right now.
And there's no real alternative, right? I mean, nobody wants Kamala Harris to become the president of the United States, I gather, not even Democrats.
I hope not. But yeah, I think if Biden, for some reason, were not the nominee, by far the likeliest replacement would be the current vice president. They're not going to take it from her. So I don't think anyone other than one of those two would be the nominee.
At this point, it's too late to build up Gavin Newsom, and obviously they cannot convince Michelle Obama. It doesn't seem like it. I think they would have run Michelle Obama if they could convince her.
I don't know. I don't have any insight into that. I know that I think she's always said she never wants to run for office. But again, it's not a baseball game, and who knows how she would be as a candidate. They'd be taking a huge risk by nominating somebody who had no experience. I think the time to replace Biden has already passed.
This leads us to a point that goes to the roots of democracy. I don't think that Joe Biden, the man, is running the Biden administration. I'm quite convinced that absolutely most Hungarians, including those who lean towards the left or are liberals in their outlook and would not sympathize with Donald Trump, I don't think that they think that Joe Biden is running the Biden administration. Can this go on for 4 more years? Is this even possible, and how can you explain this to the American people?
Well, it actually touches on a topic that we discussed earlier, which is the president has about 3,000 to 4,000 people who are supposed to work for him, and they're scattered throughout the executive branch. And then the federal government in America is 2.2 million full-time non-military federal employees. That's the population, I think, of all of Budapest and maybe the surrounding suburbs. That is our federal workforce. And the overwhelming majority of them are supporters of President Biden. They're all too eager to fulfill his vision and do what his priorities are, or what he articulated as best he could when he ran for president last time. And so if we're asking who's really running the country, the answer is it's some combination of the political appointees who serve President Biden and the entrenched Democrats and progressives and Soros-funded NGOs that have embedded themselves in our deep state. And they're actually doing a pretty good, efficient job of it because they're pretty good at that art of governing. And the challenge is that when conservatives take over, we also need to be able to play that game. We can't just, because we want a smaller government, we can't just abdicate our authority over to the left.
And with the final election issue is the election itself. As you've mentioned, that basically every American presidential election is very close. And we have every reason to expect that this November it's going to be another close election, although privately I hope for a Trump landslide, but history is not on my side on this subject. And what is also true that in the last 8 years, or we can go back further, there has been increasingly questions raised about the election every time from the losing side. How sure can we be right now, how sure are you that in November there's going to be a clear election results soon after November the 5th that the electorate will trust?
It's a good question. If you look back at the last several presidential elections, in America, the losing candidate supporters often have trouble accepting the legitimacy of the incumbent president. Part of that is because we don't have one election. We have 50 different elections, 51 including the District of Columbia. The states are in charge of administering elections. It's not a federal issue, and different states have different rules. Rules were changed in 2020. In some cases, they were changed unilaterally by judges and not by elected officials in state legislatures who are supposed to control the elections process. But I think that the mail-in numbers will be a lot less than they were in 2020. You know, look at the 2022 American midterms. We knew most of the results the next day. California always takes a month to count, but that's not competitive at the presidential level, unfortunately. And then, you know, the election is going to come down to those 5 or 6 key swing states that that voted for President Trump in 2016 and President Biden in 2020. And I think President Trump is in a good position, but of course we have to ensure the integrity of the election.
Lara Trump, who is de facto running right now the demobilization effort on the side of the GOP, she's working towards mobilizing for early voting more this year than 4 years ago. Is that so?
Yes. It might be surprising to people in other countries, but in America we don't really have election day anymore. We have about the election is the elections are Tuesday after the first Monday in November, and now most states begin early voting in September. There will be debates that take place generally after some people have already voted. I personally think an election should be connected to a time and a place, and that voters should have the same amount of information when they go to vote. But in the states that have early voting, in the states that mail everyone a ballot, mail a ballot to every registered voter, and in the states that allow you to drop off your ballot at a drop box at some location, I think it's to the advantage of conservatives if we participate in that kind of electioneering, because we like to vote on election day, but it's helpful actually if you can bank votes ahead of time through early voting. So I think the RNC has done some good work on that front.
Yeah, if they've established those rules, that those are the rules you have to play by. So if they drag it out for 2 months, you must maximize the vote in those 2 months. You mentioned debates. Well, June, they're not going to start voting by June, but June is incredibly early for a presidential election debate. How did that happen? What do you think about that?
It's pretty remarkable. Our first debate between President Biden and President Trump will be on June 27th, which is less than a month away now. We have not had any debates before September in American politics at the presidential level. And the debate in June will occur before the party conventions where the 2 candidates will be formally nominated. And I think, honestly, President Biden wanted fewer debates and not more. And if he royally messes up at a debate in June, that's a lot better for him than messing up in October at a debate. So I think his strategy was to get it out of the way and have people forget about it or have other events take over the news cycle before the election. There will also be a debate, I think September 13th is the other debate, which by that time, a few people probably will have voted early, but not that many. And we'll see if they come up with, if they agree to another debate. But I think President Biden knew that he couldn't not debate, but if he is going to debate, he wants it to be earlier, so that if he has a problem in a debate, time will fade before people vote.
So it's kind of obvious why Hungarians are so interested in American politics, why we follow your elections so closely. Who wins this November is literally might mean the difference between peace and World War III. So it's kind of obvious for us why American politics is important. But why do you find Hungary interesting? Why do you take the time to come here, to listen to us, to talk to us? What is the key to this cooperation between Hungarian and American conservatives?
Well, it's very important that we cooperate with our conservative friends, and I think there's no country other than Hungary where you really have as much of a shining example of what a conservative government can do. We face a lot of the same issues. Our southern border is not secure. We have people on the left who want to get rid of the nation state, who want a global government, who want international institutions to replace people electing their own leaders. We have issues related to life and family in our country. We have America increasingly is faithless. It has abandoned Christianity. It's abandoned traditional religion. And every society that does that will fail. And so I think we have a lot in common. And I sincerely hope that under President Trump's second term, which we will get, that Hungary will be back in the front of the line for the time of the United States. And it's embarrassing the treatment that you all are getting from our current administration.
Oh, yeah, ideologically motivated. We kind of got used to that. It's fortunate that in a lot of dimensions, the American-Hungarian ties are adequate or more than adequate, even right now when the politics is different. But the conservative relationship has really entered the golden age, I think, and that is basically embodied by the very close working relationship, and dare I say friendship, between Donald Trump and Prime Minister Viktor Orban, I think. Interestingly, Donald Trump just gave an interview to a very popular American podcaster, and he mentioned our Prime Minister twice. In both cases referring to the unfortunate tragedy that is the war in Ukraine right next door to us. Donald Trump and Prime Minister Viktor Orban completely agree that they do not want to see any more war because of the devastation that is primarily on the human level, the lives lost, but also on the level of the infrastructure of the economy of countries. But both of them are worried about the potential for escalation. Our best hope right now is to get a conservative victory in Europe in June during the European parliamentary election. But that's not enough, obviously, and we hope that then in November President Trump can win. Do you think that he will be able to get to a place where there is a ceasefire and meaningful peace negotiations soon after his inauguration?
I hope so. I think, there are differences in opinion within the American conservative movement on the issue of Ukraine, but it's clear where the trend is headed. And every day that the war goes on is more death, more destruction, more lives ruined, more money wasted, and ultimately it's going to lead to a worse deal for the Ukrainians later on. So the best time for a ceasefire was yesterday. I think President Trump understands that. I think certainly Prime Minister Orban understands that. But the tendency in Washington and in Brussels is to adopt the attitude that we should just never give up. We should fight for every square inch and fight to the death for every last Ukrainian. And that is a recipe for so much damage to the world, to the lives, to the economy. And ceasefire is in everyone's best interest. And in fact, there was a proposal for a ceasefire 2 years ago, and Brussels and Washington wrecked that because they wanted to continue the war.
Even a year ago, General Milley suggested that that was the time to negotiate, right? Before the so-called Ukrainian spring offensive, which turned into a summer offensive. Jerome Milley recommended that. There seemed to be a moment when the Biden administration was almost listening to one of its top generals. Then, of course, Prime Minister Orban mentioned just days before the Ukrainian attack started that this was the time to stop. Yes, it's a difficult position to start negotiating from, but every next day it's going to be harder. Let's hope that Donald Trump can deliver on his promise of peace, because we remember the first three terms, right? He didn't start any new wars. He finished the one that America was fighting against ISIS, and he brought the Middle East closer than ever to potential peace through the Abraham Accords. Do you think that a coming Trump administration can help not just with ending the Ukraine war, but also with bringing, well, at least a decrease in violence to the Middle East?
Well, you're absolutely right that President Trump did not start any new wars. He was the first American president since Jimmy Carter not to start a war. And it was also the only presidency of our last four presidents during which Putin did not invade his neighbor. Putin invaded Georgia under President George W. Bush. He invaded Ukraine the first time under President Obama. He invaded Ukraine under President Biden. And President Trump was the one president where Putin knew that, that invading his neighbors was not a good idea.
In fact, nobody invaded anybody.
Nobody invaded anybody.
4 years of world peace.
That's right. And we had the Abraham Accords in the Middle East. That is now in jeopardy under President Biden. And who would have thought that we would have the worst war on the European continent since World War II? Just, because of the inability of Brussels and Washington to show the right leadership. So I'm optimistic that, yes, a second Trump administration would end the conflict in Ukraine and move the Middle East back towards a peace deal, which is ultimately what's needed.
Great. Spencer, is there anything I haven't asked but you would like to talk about?
Well, I would just once again, reiterate what an honor it is to be here, and thank you very much for having me. I've really enjoyed my time in Budapest, and please stay in touch. I think all of us at the Heritage Foundation and throughout the conservative movement benefit tremendously from learning from our foreign counterparts. And I would love to personally stay in touch. I would also encourage you to check us out at project2025.org and spread the word also that hope is on the way, help is on the way, hopefully, this year. And best of luck to all of you on June 9th, and as Hungary assumes the chairmanship of the European Union.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for coming, for taking the time to be here with us. Please do remember that it's not just about America. The June European parliamentary elections are extremely important. We can finally show that we are useful allies and not just a nuisance and a burden, the Europeans, to our American friends. And we are going to continue with the We Win, They Lose project. There will be other roundtable discussions, and we are expecting to have more friends from Heritage and other top think tanks, institutes from the United States. Spencer, thank you again. And we are looking forward to meeting you again here or in the United States.
Absolutely. Thank you.